Hi folks, Scott Powell here again with another History of Tomorrow in 14 Points Daily. My topic for today is very fundamental to both my nonfiction and fiction writing, and that is quite simply the world we live in. For those of you that haven't read The History of Now yet, that's absolutely the single best place you could possibly go to learn a summary of world history. Very accessible, short, relatively, compact, essentialized. Perhaps the most empowering thing that I'm proud of having done in the history of now is arrived at an integrated formulation of the world we live in. So I'm just going to go ahead and blurt out what is my most elaborate formulation. In the history of now, it's a little bit shorter, but my most elaborate and basic formulation that I operate with is the following. The world we live in is an interconnected agglomeration of nearly 200 countries that constitute 10 major cultural blocks and various outliers, predominated by 5 cardinal cultures in which the United States has primacy. Now, you go ahead and rewind and re-listen to that a few times and think about what's happening there. If you compare that formulation, which is incredibly empowering, it provides an integrated foundation for all historical cognition. If you compare that to what you would otherwise have, and which most people settle for, of course, which is just thinking of the world as, fundamentally about 200 countries, and yes, some of them are more important than others, but it's how do you rank them, and before you know it, it's overwhelming even at the stage of simply describing the world, let alone revealing and explaining it, if you can't integrate. So the method of constructs, which I referred to recently in a previous video, is absolutely key. And arriving at an integrated formulation is incredibly empowering, because if you don't have it, then your starting point is completely unmanageable, and history becomes something that is absolutely impossible to integrate. It's impossible to encompass, because 200 moving parts is too many, let alone all the previous incarnations of things that are extinct now and gone. But it's simply too many, and everybody knows it, and ever since, I can remember, all historians and teachers do is they cherry pick. They, of course, decide, okay, we'll not cover this, we'll not cover that. They can't necessarily explain why, but we'll cover certain topics and we'll try to do a good job. And okay, but the idea that there is such a thing as the history of the world is essentially off limits at this point. The idea that we have the ability to integrate human history, this mass plethora of singulars, that's off the table. Nobody believes that's even possible. It is possible. It's done in the history of now. It's extended in the history of tomorrow. And to a considerable extent, it's the basis for what my protagonists are doing in the 14 points. So I hope that interests you. The history of now has been around for a while. It was written in 2018, but it's still applicable. There's really very little that I would change in that thesis if I were starting from scratch today. It's incredibly relevant, and in the history of tomorrow, the adjustments that are necessary are made. So there is some acknowledgement of the events that have occurred more recently, and which I've had to accommodate into the thesis. But basically, there's nothing you're going to learn in the history of now that wouldn't be perfectly empowering to you, whatever your level is currently as a student of history, and allow you to get to the next level. So consider that, the history of now. It's been around for a little while, but it's still relevant. And think about the idea that the world we live in as an integrated awareness is a critical foundation to historical thinking. So thanks, and see you next time.